In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King accepts the credentials of 7 new foreign ambassadors. The King urges the World Bank to continue its support for Jordan to deal with pressures caused by the hosting of Syrian refugees. And the United States says it will work with Egypt's new president. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King accepted the credentials of 7 newly appointed ambassadors to the kingdom. The ceremony took place at the Basman Palace. The new ambassadors are Grigori Tabatadazi of Georgia, Muhammad Dahiru Ambaba of Benin, Mamadou Sall of Senegal, Antonio da Costa Fernandez of Angola, Nama Henry of Burkina Faso, Igor Bolbokino of Moldova,
سلام جلالة الملك المعظم سلام
The new ambassadors laid wreaths on the tombs of late King Hussein, King Abdullah I, and King Talal. His Majesty the King met World Bank President Jim Yong Kim, who is heading a delegation on a Middle East tour. King Abdullah welcomed the World Bank team at the Basman Palace for a review of Jordan's relations with the world's lending institution. These include joint economic programs and enabling the kingdom to cope with regional challenges, notably the influx of Syrian refugees. The king said World Bank support had enabled Jordan to carry out development plans and boost capacity building to enhance economic and fiscal reform. He said a resource-poor Jordan, hosting the largest number of Syrian refugees, had shouldered a huge burden with immense pressure on its infrastructure and services, especially in the country's northern and central regions. He stressed more support by the World Bank and also called for increasing aid by United Nations agencies to refugee host communities. Kim pledged continued World Bank technicals and developmental aid as part of its partnership with Jordan to help it achieve sustainable growth. The World Bank, he said, recognized the pressure on Jordan for hosting Syrian refugees and also noted the king's recent order to the government to draw up a 10-year blueprint to boost financial and monetary policy. Kim pledged World Bank support for drafting and implementing the economic blueprint. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour also briefed the World Bank president on burdens Jordan bears for hosting 1.3 million Syrians. The refugee crisis, he said, placed huge pressure on infrastructure and education and health sectors. He said the world community should stand by Jordan as it hosts the largest number of Syrian refugees. Mansour said the kingdom will remain hospitable to those seeking refuge in it despite scarce resources and economic pressures. He also gave a briefing on political reforms the kingdom had carried out over the past 3 years. Later, the World Bank president, Kim, said the bank is mulling over providing a $1 billion loan to Jordan. Of the amount, he said $800 million will be used to support infrastructure projects and $200 million to the state treasury. But he added negotiations over the loan have not yet started. Kim told a joint news conference with Minister of Planning and International Cooperation Ibrahim Saif that Jordan bears massive burdens as a result of the Syrian refugee crisis, stressing the bank's commitment to standing by Jordan in the current circumstances. Saif said the World Bank chiefs meeting was an opportunity to reaffirm the bank's support and commitment to Jordan in the current circumstances. The Chief Justice Department has launched a fully computerized system that has been installed at religious courts in Jordan and Holy Jerusalem. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein led the ceremony to inaugurate the new central system that aims to develop work, ease litigation procedures, and save citizens time and effort. The Crown Prince was briefed on the system that would shorten the time for document and paperwork within hours instead of weeks, through an integrated and constantly updated database. Chief Justice Ahmed Hlayel told the ceremony that the launch would upgrade service to the public and create a better environment to ensure justice and a smooth litigation process. The lower house has approved the amended Bar Association law after a robust debate in the legislature's current extraordinary session. During today's meeting, chaired by Lower House Speaker Atif Tarawne, MPs passed the bill upon recommendation of the House Legal Committee, but after approving some key amendments. Chief among these was an article that empowers the Bar Association against any attempt to dissolve it. The lawmakers delegated an article in the current law giving the government the right to disband the association's Council for Public Safety. During a session next Sunday, the House will take up a number of draft laws on the agenda, including the Al Hussein Cancer Center bill. The United States said it will look forward to working with former Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as Egypt's new president. However, it expressed concerns about what it called the restrictive political environment in which Sisi was elected. The Election Commission said Sisi had won 97% in the presidential election last week, confirming interim results that had given him a landslide victory. We get more in this report.
Supporters of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi celebrate victory at the polls. Egypt's Elections Commission says he won the presidency by more than 96% of the vote. Celebrations last throughout the night in Tahrir Square, the heart of a popular uprising that toppled Hosni Mubarak in 2011. President Mohamed Morsi, who replaced Mubarak, was democratically elected and one of the few leaders not from the military. But 2 years later, and many Egyptians gather at this square to show support for Sisi, a former general. In his first speech since the election, he promises to restore stability.
Sons of the great Egyptian people, I address you. You have fulfilled your duties, and now is the time for work that will transport our Egypt to a bright tomorrow and a better future. The work that will retain stability to this nation, the work that will be advanced and promoted to the level Egyptians truly deserve.
But for his opponents, there's not much to dance about. Sisi overthrew President Morsi last July after mass protests. He also oversaw a bloody purge of Morsi's Islamic Brotherhood, in which more than 1,400 people were killed and thousands detained. Many Islamic groups boycotted the election and turnout was low, less than half of eligible voters, raising questions about Sisi's credibility. And there could be fireworks if he doesn't tackle the country's widening budget deficit, rampant corruption and high unemployment.
Election officials in Syria started counting votes in a presidential election in which President Bashar al-Assad is widely expected to win. But rebel fighters, the political opposition in exile, Western powers and other countries called it a charade. This report has more.
Polls in the Syrian presidential elections closed at midnight at all polling stations. Immediately and following the closure of the polls, employees started to count the votes of each of the three candidates. The election is expected to deliver an overwhelming victory for President Bashar al-Assad. Neither of his rivals, former President Hassan al-Nouri or parliamentarian Maher Hajjar, enjoys much support. Rebel fighters, the political opposition in exile, Western powers and Gulf Arab states said no credible vote can be held in a country where large areas of the country are outside state control and millions have been displaced by conflict. However, non-governmental delegations who monitored the process said the elections were free. Speaking after arriving in neighboring Lebanon, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry described Syrian vote as meaningless.
The elections are non-elections. The elections are a great big zero. They're meaningless. And they're meaningless because you can't have an election where millions of your people don't even have an ability to vote, where they don't have an ability to contest the election, and they have no choice.
U.S. President Barack Obama's former ambassador to Damascus harshly criticized the White House Syria policy. Robert Ford said Washington should have done more earlier to arm moderate rebel factions.
We need, and we have long needed, to help moderates in the Syrian opposition with both weapons and other non-lethal assistance. Had we done that a couple of years ago, had we ramped it up, frankly, the al-Qaeda groups that have been winning adherents would have been unable to compete with the moderates who, frankly, we have much in common with.
Following the election, explosions were heard around Aleppo, Damascus and Idlib. A jet was seen above a town said to be Mleha in rural Damascus, and an explosion was seen in a building in the town. There was also widespread destruction after bombings in various districts of Aleppo. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
The Palestinian Hamas group handed control of 2 government ministries in the Gaza Strip to members of the new Palestinian Unity government. The handover was a further sign of reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah factions. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas swore in the government that set Israel on a collision course with Washington over U.S. pledges to work with the new administration while Israel shunned it. New cabinet minister Mufid al-Husayna, a U.S.-educated engineer, took over from an outgoing Hamas minister at the Public Works and Housing Ministry. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said in Beirut that the United States would work with the new Palestinian Unity government. But Kerry said Washington would be monitoring the new cabinet's commitment to continued cooperation with Israel.
As we said, based on what we know now about the composition of this technocratic government, which has no ministers affiliated with Hamas and is committed to the principles that I described, We will work with it as we need to, as is appropriate. We are going to be watching it very closely, as we have said from day one, to absolutely ensure that it upholds each of those things it has talked about, that it doesn't cross the line.
In the occupied West Bank, Palestinians marched during a funeral for a man shot and killed by Israeli troops. A large crowd turned out in the town of Huwara, outside the city of Nablus, where a funeral procession carried the body of Ala Aoudeh to a mosque to perform funeral rites. The Palestinian mainstream Fatah group said Aoudeh, a 30-year-old mobile phone shop owner, was killed in cold blood. Relatives also disputed a claim by the Israeli military that he opened fire and wounded a soldier at a checkpoint. They said he was at the checkpoint awaiting a delivery of phones. Elsewhere in the West Bank, Palestinian youths clashed with Israeli troops outside the Ofer prison camp near the city of Ramallah. Some Palestinian prisoners are on hunger strike at the camp protesting against detainment without trial. 2 car bombs went off in quick succession in the Iraqi city of Kirkuk, killing at least 4 civilians and wounding 9 others. Police said a parked car went off in a bus terminal in the center, and few minutes later, a second car bomb exploded near police headquarters and a number of liquor stores. The blast damaged a number of shops and burned out cars. Gunmen fired a rocket-propelled grenade at the office of new Libyan Prime Minister Ahmed Maitiq. An aide said nobody was hurt when the grenade hit the building's kitchen on the same floor as Maitiq's office, adding that the premier had not been there. Maitiq was elected by parliament last month in a chaotic vote that many lawmakers disputed. Hours earlier, a renegade Libyan general, Khalifa Haftar, survived an assassination attempt outside Benghazi. A suicide bomber drove a Land Cruiser packed with explosives to retired General Haftar's base. Haftar was not hurt, but 3 of his guards were killed. In the city of Sirt, gunmen shot dead an official at the International Committee of the Red Cross in the central Libyan city of Sirt. Republican allegations that President Barack Obama broke the law when he freed 5 Taliban prisoners in return for U.S. soldier Bowie Berdagal looked unlikely to be tested in court. Legal experts say that's because judges are reluctant to intervene in political disputes. But that is unlikely to stop the political firestorm. Republicans have attacked the Obama administration's decision not to consult Congress before the exchange. Dramatic pictures have emerged on the soldiers' release. Here are the details.
His captivity under the Taliban dragged on for nearly 5 years, but his release took only moments. Dramatic video released by the Taliban on Wednesday shows captured U.S. Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl during his peaceful handover to U.S. Special Forces. It happened in this barren valley near the Pakistan border on Saturday. Bergdahl's release was negotiated between the U.S. and the Taliban under mediation from Qatar, his freedom for releasing 5 Taliban detainees held by the U.S. in Guantanamo, Cuba. In the video, the 28-year-old appeared dazed, maybe by the light, maybe from anxiety over events unfolding around him. A plane and helicopters circle overhead as militants dot the hillside, armed with rocket launchers. Next time you come back to Afghanistan, the Taliban tell him, you won't leave alive. As the Black Hawk helicopter lands, the militants shout, "Do not panic." At the moment of the exchange, a quick shaking of hands. All eyes are trained on each other. The tension is clear. The Taliban narrator in the video says the U.S. Special Forces were in a rush and didn't greet them properly. Bergdahl gets a quick body search before he's helped into the Black Hawk. From touchdown to takeoff, the operation was over in just a minute. U.S. officials would later say that Bergdahl broke down in tears when he learned inside that helicopter as it flew off that he was now a free man. Bergdahl was captured by the Taliban after leaving his base under circumstances that are still unclear. He's now in a U.S. military hospital in Germany, getting treatment and undergoing mental assessments.
Many residents in the eastern Ukrainian town of Slavyansk were forced to flee their homes as fighting between government forces and pro-Russian separatists raged for a second day. The Kiev government is trying to break rebellions by pro-Russian militias, which it fears could lead to dismemberment of the country. The government said more than 300 rebels had been killed in the past 24 hours in the anti-terrorist operation centered on the town. Ukrainian President-elect Petro Poroshenko said it was possible he would meet Russian leader Vladimir Putin at commemorations in France this week. He said Ukraine dismissed a Russian draft resolution to the UN Security Council that seeks to create corridors to allow civilians to escape fighting in the east. In preparation for the World Cup 2014 in Brazil, teams from all over the world are training hard and getting ready. The Spanish national team held a training session at Robert F. Kennedy Field in Washington, D.C. The Spanish team is under immense pressure to defend the World Championship title once again. Spain's first game is against Netherlands on June 13th. As for the Argentine team, their coach Alejandro Sabella told media in Buenos Aires that the South American side is more than just Lionel Messi as the team chases its third World Cup title. With some bookmakers giving Argentina 9-2 odds of clinching another FIFA tournament title, Sabella warned that overconfidence on the football pitch could be bad for his team. All eyes were on the host team. Brazil coach Luis Felipe Scolari said Brazil has a long way to go if they want to make World Cup history and win a record 6th title. After a Sunday training session, the coach came down on the team's defense, and on Tuesday he reiterated that the team knows there is still work to be done as they prepare for their 2014 campaign. The host nation opens the World Cup against Croatia in Sao Paulo on June 12th.
Trabalhando aí com ele a forma como ele joga, de que forma.
And finally, warm tonight with partly cloudy skies and northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow it will continue to be hot with temperatures 4 to 5 degrees above seasonal average. Winds will be southeasterly moderate. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect moderate conditions tonight, but hot tomorrow with northerly moderate to fresh winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King accepts the credentials of 7 new foreign ambassadors. The King urges the World Bank to continue its support for Jordan to deal with pressures caused by the hosting of Syrian refugees. And the United States says it will work with Egypt's new president. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.